has a monopoly on the truth. Our version of our own truths are based on our own lived experiences. In this space, we welcome different perspectives to learn, unlearn, and enlighten. Welcome to The Lantern. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Lantern in 2025. No one is more surprised that I'm still podcasting this year than me, because when I started this journey, I wasn't sure what it was going to be like. And today I have my first British guest, which I'm very proud of. It's Miriam Owusu. I hope I'm saying it right. I feel like we just rehearsed it offline. I may have gotten it wrong. Did I say it right this time?
Perfectly.
Okay, amazing. Miriam, thank you so much for being my first guest this year, and obviously my first British guest. I love that.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate that. And I didn't know I was the first British guest, so
You really are. The barriers to entry have been quite high. I don't know why they don't want to come and chat, but hopefully when people see that you're on, they'll understand that it's all a safe space and they can come and chat and we can get out the knowledge that people need to know about. So as a departure question, I would love to know, what does mental health mean to you?
yeah, that's an amazing question. For me, mental health really means doing the inner work and allowing that to just flow and manifest outwardly. So, for example, whether it's going to the gym, walking, meditating, for me, that's really inner work, and that reflects. So that's how I see mental health and well-being, and also just living a life that you truly want to live. Because I think when you don't live a life that you truly want to live or is authentic to you, it can just damage your mental health. So yeah.
I love the latter part of your answer, because I think the former part is the traditional sort of understanding of mental health. And I think with where things are moving and evolving and progressing, more so much, I think I resonate more with the latter version of what you described. Tell me about, or describe, what is your perfect employment, business opportunity, or holistic opportunity of where you would find yourself, where your mental health would be at the perfect equilibrium for you. What would you be doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, a few things. I would say, first and foremost, culture. So, a culture and environment that will enable me to be my true authentic self. And I think that's particularly important, not only as a woman, but as a Black woman. And I say that to say because I work in the tech space. And when you look at the data or the statistics around that, there's not many. There's not much diversity when it comes to that space. So I want to be in an environment, and I'm intentional with being in environments that will embrace me fully. So if I want to have my natural hair out, I'm embraced. If I want
Yeah.
to have my extensions in, I'm embraced. So that's first and foremost. I would also say a company or an organization that recognize where you're wanting to go, particularly in your career. So there's that clear understanding of career progression, because I'm still, I would say I'm not young, but I'm still young in terms of my career. And I know Miriam in 10 years' time will be completely different in terms of my prospects and position. So I want to be in a company that will be able to understand that, to know that, okay, if she comes in at this role, she's not going to be in this role forever. So how can we help her? And whether it's moving into leadership, support her with that. What resources do they have training? So that's key. And I would also say, it kind of links with culture, but like a company that really understand mental health and well-being, because work is work, right? But ultimately, we're humans, and there are going to be times in your life during your career where you may go through adversities. So, do they have things like bereavement leave, maternity leave, paternity leave. And if they don't, I think that really speaks to the culture, and almost a lack of understanding that human beings are the ones who are working in this company. So, yeah, those are a few things that I'll probably outline.
I love the 3 points that you highlight, but I'm curious as to whether you think we are expecting too much of the workplace, because it seems like there's quite a few intersectionalities of what your expectations are, and being mindful of we're coming into structures that have already been established, right? They've been running for years and years and years. I mean, even going back to the 1800s, industrial revolution time, where, the mentality on the mindset of building these corporations was just for it to be cogs in a wheel and for people to sort of plug and play. But
Yeah.
with what you're describing, it almost seems like you want a curated human experience. So how do you think workplaces can be better at understanding what the human experience, well, let me rephrase, the desired human experience, and then the intersection of productivity and profits?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say with any organization or company, there are people. And it's so important to understand people. And if companies overlook that, particularly in this day and age, post COVID, what you can risk is an issue with retention. You could recruit, but then are your employees staying when it comes to the 5 year mark and 10-year mark? And oftentimes, when I look at companies that have a high staff turnover, it shows me that they haven't really adapted, or they may be fixed in a certain way. And I think to your point, Kiani, yes, they do have already an existing structure, but humans change. The environments that they live in change. It could be even with what's going on in the economy or the market,
Mm,
right? So if, for example, you're 10 years ago, you may be paying your employees a certain amount, and then come 2025, you're fixed about not moving because of profitability. And as you outlined, as a business, that's your main aim: drive profit and reduce expenses and costs. But if you do that, then you're not recognizing that the cost of living may have gone up, and it's a real issue that many people are facing.
mm,
So that's one thing. So it's important to just understand that. I would also say companies could also proactively understand their staff through doing things like training and courses. So I've worked in companies where, for example, they do things like disc training. I don't know whether you may have heard of that.
mm.
But essentially, it's a personality test
Oh, okay.
where every employee will fill out this extensive questionnaire, and that will outline what kind of personality are they. Are they someone that's a bit more introverted, but they're really strong in leadership skills? Or how do they deal with like a difficult situation? Now, if you're a manager, for example, and you're managing a team of whether it's 10 plus employees under you, then you can understand, okay, this is how Miriam operates, or this is how Kiani operates, and then adjust to that. So you're not necessarily focusing on profitability, but you're understanding those under you. And as with all of us, I would say, we love to be recognized and for people to understand us. And if you've got an employer who do that, then again, it just feeds back into that whole retention. And I don't know the statistics exactly, but recruitment is very, very costly.
Yeah.
And re-recruiting takes it to a whole nother level. So if employers are not understanding that they are dealing with people, it's important. And I know another thing post COVID, you've had a lot of companies now moving to a hybrid model or a remote model. And what that has done is it's attracted talent who may not have otherwise taken those jobs. Let's say it's a mother. or a father who have to balance childcare and also working full time. If they join a company that understands that, okay, if I need to do the school run, I could drop off, but then return and maybe do later hours. That in itself is just powerful. That's phenomenal. And then you're attracting great talent, and also helping with diversity because irrespective of what company or organization you are, having a diverse talent is proven to also drive profitability. So all of these things need to work in sync. And I do believe where companies are fixed with not addressing all of these things, then it will have a ripple effect, which may not be ideal. So yeah.
I love everything that you've said, United, and I couldn't agree more. And I think maybe the difference between where we are now and what was happening before is that people were seen as more disposable resources where you could just easily replace people because there would always be somebody willing to do the work. But I guess because of where we find ourselves now with the how graduates are not being able to be absorbed within the workplace, and how, of course, as you mentioned, with work-life balance being an important point, with mental health being an important point, these points are now becoming pressure points that companies actually now have to take a look at and actually now begin to understand people. Because historically, they didn't necessarily need to understand Miriam for Miriam because, oh, we could just replace Miriam and get someone who's willing to do the job at 50 pence for the hour, and let's call it a day. But now, because of them struggling to even attract people, because I follow a lot of content where some people don't even desire to work for somebody else purely because of all the, the bureaucracy, the career progression prospects and the pay. They have just decided, I'll just rather bet on myself and see how that goes. But this segue, I think, is the perfect opportunity for me to ask you about your journey, your history in academia. What did you study, and how have you come to being a Miriam award-winning businesswoman today?
Yeah. Thank you so much. So I studied law at university and I graduated back in 2019. But prior to me even starting my degree, I was working in sales and I have worked in sales for about 10 years overall, moving into companies like becoming a real estate agent for one of the top agents in London. And at one point, I was selling or in the telecommunication space, and now I've moved into financial technology. But when I was within that, when I was studying my degree, I had the benefit of almost seeing how I operate in the world of work whilst also studying. And I think sometimes students don't always get that privilege. So I was very quickly able to see, okay, yes, you're good at the legal side of things, but you're able to build an excellent rapport with people. And as a result, you're able to bring in revenue. That's a skill not to play with.
Mm,
So I really pushed with my sales, and post university, that's where I became a real estate agent. And then I moved into the world of fintech. And there's been a lot of taking a step back throughout my journey to really understand, okay, do I actually want to become a lawyer? Do I want to qualify? So how I was able to just check myself and check the trajectory I was going on was doing things like vacation schemes and placements at law firms. So
mhm,
I actually had two vacation schemes at top US law firms, and that was an opportunity for me to go in. And for those people that don't know about what vacation schemes are, it's an opportunity where law firms give aspiring lawyers an opportunity to come in for about a week, sometimes 2 weeks, and they're essentially giving them an insight into what the life of a lawyer looks like. And a student or an aspiring lawyer or a graduate even could then make an informed decision on whether it's aligned with my culture. And following those 2 weeks, the law firm will decide whether they want to essentially take you on to train you up to become a qualified lawyer. So I have essentially done so much work experience to help me understand, okay, what am I doing right now, or where do I want to go? And yeah, I very quickly understood that sales as well as the fintech space was a space that I really wanted to embrace. And that's what I've done post graduation. Now, in terms of my award, last year, 2024, at the beginning of last year, I actually went through a period of depression. And it was just a difficult moment. It really was. And I'm a person that I've done so many amazing things in my life. And during that time, I almost looked at myself in the mirror and I just couldn't recognize the person who was reflecting. And I really thank God that I was able to get out of that space very quickly. And that required people around me to support me, going to therapy in that space. And post coming out of that space, one thing that I was led to do was to really start to inspire and uplift people. And that was really just me understanding, okay, if I was able to really just do the inner work during that time of darkness and come out of it very quickly, and so many people aren't fortunate enough to do that, then that is a blessing. So what can I do with that? So I started to proactively use my platform, particularly LinkedIn, to almost put posts out there that went beyond just the standard posts. I would say there was always an undertone of uplifting,
Mm.
inspiring, talking about topics that were really dear to my heart. And if you look at my LinkedIn, you'll be able to see that I'm not someone that's big on social media, but that was something that I was led to do. And off the back of that, I was recognized by an organization, and essentially, I was nominated for this award called Young Businesswomen of the Year, which recognised those under 30 that were really making a huge impact, not only in their careers but in the community, and really trying to uplift and inspire others. And I was stunned at that point when I got nominated, because it was just like, it was still very new, like coming out of the place of depression. I went to the awards late last year, and I found out I won, and it was a very rigorous process. They did their due diligence. They looked at everything that I was doing, the podcast I was doing, or invited to do, and they really understood my story very
Mm.
quickly. And even till this day, I still pinch myself. But my journey, particularly last year, is testament to the fact that if you do the work and really do the work, and you don't have to do it on your own, what could be birthed out of that can really be phenomenal. And winning the Young Business Award is great, but as you could probably tell from what I do, Kagani, it's beyond. Like, I'm not trying to just win awards. I'm really trying to make an impact and help people. Yeah.
I love everything that you said. It's so beautiful. And congratulations on your award. I think it's fantastic that you're getting recognized for the impact that you've made in the community. I mean, we connected on LinkedIn and not too long ago, but even I've, love reading your posts because yes, there's always an uplifting tone and message to them. And I think it's something that's just needed at this time because people are hopeless and not feeling very positive about the future. So when hearing these turnaround stories of turning, lemons into lemonade and alchemizing negativity, it does, I think, inspire and motivate people. I have a few questions to ask now off the back end of what you said, Enated. Are you comfortable sharing what exactly led to your depression or the circumstances surrounding your depression?
Yeah. To be honest, yeah, I'm not comfortable delving further into it, but
Okay.
what I would say, a part of it was caused by burnout.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that it was caused by burnout because actually just this morning, Mental Health UK has released their workplace 2025 report, and I think they said 78% of employees are burnt out, and the age group is 18 to 25, so it's usually the Gen Zers who are struggling the most in comparison to other groups. But overall, their stats or their survey is just showing that the workplace generally is burnt out. But one of the things that I find interesting about burnout is that it's quite a nuanced concept. I think people, when they hear burnout, they just think physical exhaustion, but it goes beyond the physical because there's also mental, emotional. mental exhaustion, there's emotional exhaustion, there's occupational exhaustion. So there's different types of burnout that you can experience. So one that I find interesting is if you're not being stimulated by your job, you can actually get burnt out.
Yeah.
And the example that I made the other day is that it actually takes the same amount of energy to jog on the same spot as in comparison to when you're actually jogging. So a lot of people don't realize is that stagnation could be causing your burnout because you're not being stimulated, you're not doing new things. So this is why you constantly have to also be, I would say, taking responsibility and accountability of your own experience. And I think this ties into what we spoke about at the beginning of the podcast, where I was sort of suggesting, are we placing this responsibility for workplaces to curate our best version of what we think our careers and experiences should be? But of course, I think we can all work together harmoniously to get to where everybody can be, where it can be profitable, where potential can be realized, where purposes can be met. But not everybody is going to be able to basically be able to mix all of the ingredients of their cake and bake the cake in those organizations. And I think that that's something that we have to be mindful of. My next segue was going to be regarding you pivoting, I would say, or I wouldn't, maybe pivot is the wrong word to use, but at what point did you start questioning studying law and then saying to yourself, I'm not sure if I even want to be a lawyer? Did you make that, was that analysis prompted by not gaining opportunities, or was it just your own internal dialogue with yourself of not necessarily being sure if that's the career that you want to pursue in the long run or in the
Yeah.
short term? Because I mean, this was a while ago, so actually in the short term.
Yeah, yeah. I would say for me, it was a few things.
Mm,
Um, like looking at not only the title of a lawyer, which is often glamorized, looking at what the day to day looks like and whether that's aligned to where I want to be. And I think that's important. Like it was me having that reality check of like, yeah, I can say I'm a lawyer, but if you're not happy, what's the point? Say I'm a doctor. If you're not happy, what's the point?
yeah.
And I've always been someone that's I reevaluate. I always check in with myself where I can, whether that's on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, a quarterly basis. I do that. And when I kind of looked at that life, I almost had to really look at myself deeply and think, okay, are you just going in because of the title, or are you going in because you have a genuine passion? And it was questions like that
Mm,
which made me really start to be proactive with getting opportunities within the legal field,
mm,
to help me make that informed decision. Because you could be in your head,
mm,
but do you know how it is on the ground? And not only did I get opportunities at those US law firms, I also got a placement at a council.
mm,
So a local law firm, like a high street firm within where my university is based.
mm,
And that really helped me just weigh up everything. And as I mentioned, whilst I was studying at university full time, I was also working
mm,
in sales. So
mm,
when I was also getting feedback from my managers at the companies that I was working for, or the sales roles I was working in, they would just always say, like, Miriam, like, don't play with the gift that you have when it comes to sales. They would just watch me speak to individuals. And at the time, I was selling mobile phone contracts at the time. Within seconds, minutes, they'll be buying
oh wow.
multiple mobile, and where my colleagues may have struggled a lot more. And for me at the time, I didn't really realize what my strengths were. It was just kind of like, okay, I could speak. But they were speaking on, okay, you could build a rapport, and that's bringing in revenue for you because you get commission, but it's also bringing revenue for us.
Mm,
So I started to kind of lean on that and use that, and that just kind of blossomed when I came out of university, and I thought, okay, let me take it to the next level and see whether this is something that I could do as a career.
mm,
And that's where I moved into becoming a real estate agent. And it almost took me to the next level of confidence because I went from selling mobile phone contracts, which was probably of the value of like £100, £50, to then selling properties that were hundreds of thousands to the millions. So if if you look at your strengths and you realize what could be generated from that, it's something to really just focus on. And that's exactly what I've done post university, focused on my strengths, where I can make an impact to not only myself, but to the companies that I've worked for. And like being a lawyer almost then took a backseat
Mm,
because it was like, okay, there's something here.
mm,
And I enjoy it. Like working in sales is different to working in the typical law firm or corporate world. You've got that client interaction or prospect interaction every second.
mm,
Every second, you're able to. You've got things like targets and KPIs. Like there's revenue on you. Like you have to hit those targets. I know law firms do have billable hours, etc. But in sales, it's a different vibe.
yeah.
And a lot of the times the deals can close very quickly. It could be a 2 week turnover, and you have to literally be on that journey every step of the way, whether it's finding that potential client to book in a meeting and then watching that deal close. And as a lawyer, you don't necessarily always have that
Mm.
opportunity to do so. So yeah, I hope that answers your
No, it
question.
really does. And I find that really interesting because I'm just thinking about had you gone straight into a law firm, you wouldn't necessarily have realized that skill set because arguably in a law firm, the only people working on that skill set would be partners because they're client facing and involved in securing the client end to end and bringing the client into the firm. And then obviously everybody below them is focused on different tasks. So you may not necessarily have had the opportunity to explore the skill set that you have now. So I think it was probably a blessing in disguise, um, because I think a lot of people now are probably struggling to identify what they are good at. And I speak from experience because as somebody who went down the traditional route quite quickly, you don't necessarily pay attention to other skills that you may have had before that. So when I had my big pause and pivot moment, it took a lot of internal work of taking stock of who was Kanye even before I started studying law.
Yeah,
And it's a lot of work because I think, as you said, once you start identifying yourself as a particular thing, it's very difficult to disassociate from
yeah,
that thing. And it's scary because
yeah,
I think a lot of people don't realize when you've called yourself something day in and day out and then wake up one day and decide, okay, I'm dropping that,
yeah,
it's not only the outside noise that becomes very loud, but it's also the internal resistance that you have of, okay, then who am I if I'm not hanging on to this title? But I think for me, the biggest lesson was around identity and realizing that you don't necessarily need to be defined by a particular identity and that your identity can evolve. It's just the societal constructs that have these identities and boxes that's convenient to put people and label people, but that doesn't necessarily speak to your capabilities as an individual or what exactly you can bring and create in this world. So I'd just like to loop it back to mental health because I think that lots of the mental health issues that people are experiencing currently are obviously stemming from workplace environments. And as you mentioned, burnout, I said, stagnation, burnout is also quite a big thing. What would you say to somebody who's maybe in the traditional route, has gone all the way, hasn't had the benefit of having experience like yours, and maybe is falling victim to some of these mental health issues like depression and burnout, but doesn't necessarily know how to come out of it because obviously they've gone down the trad route and maybe everybody around them is also in the trad route. What advice would you give to them of just trying to get out of that rut, I would call it?
yeah. So I would say, first and foremost, recognizing how you feel in that moment and really taking stock of that, because that emotion of feeling overwhelmed, sometimes stagnant, is not something you want to have for a long period of time. So I would say that. And then really going back to what makes you happy, like what actually makes you happy. And I think sometimes we overlook that question because we're focused on the bills, the paycheck, our responsibilities, which is very important. You know, for me, I live on my own, so I
Mm,
completely understand. But equally, my happiness really is something that, if you're not careful, your environment could take away from you. And then the question is, are you just living your life just to pay your bills?
mm,
So it's taking that moment. Now, if you're in that kind of position, like as I said, I've been in a position where I've kind of been there.
mm,
You may not have the strength to do it on your own.
mm.
So this is why it's very important to have what I would call a tribe around you. So these are people within, particularly your personal network, who you trust and you could open up to. It could just be that one person. And essentially speaking to them about where you're at. Because sometimes you could be so in your mind, or like when you're going through all of these situations, you may not look like what you're going through. Like when I went through that situation, you could look at me and I'll be smiling, not
Oh,
knowing
that's
that I was
dangerous.
going through, yeah, I'm a smiler,
Mm,
not knowing that I was going through that. And when I shared my story, particularly on LinkedIn, I didn't divulge into what transpired other than the fact that I went through depression. People were just shocked because they were like, Miriam, you were smiling. So speaking, and that's what I was doing behind the scenes, speaking to my loved ones, speaking to those who could help me. And that's what really just led me to getting a therapist at the time. And that came from me speaking to one of my girls, my friends. And she was like, well, my therapist supported me in so many aspects of my life. And I was like, okay, I'll trust you. And I could honestly say that therapist was just, she went beyond being a therapist. She spoke life into me. And she almost was able to tell me before before I even saw it at that time, where I was going. And she was saying things like, Miriam, you're going to make an impact. There's a light in you. And when you're going through those things, you're just kind of like, you're a bit detached, right? You could be numb. But I was around people who were speaking life into me, even though I didn't feel like I had that life, right? So that's important. And I think if you are working, many people should know that there are, especially if you're in the right companies, the ability to take time off. And I don't advocate for just taking advantage of that, right? Because if you are capable of working, work. But there's times where you literally cannot function. Like the simplest task could just be so overwhelming. You're just so in your thoughts, and that can exacerbate the issue even more. Whereas taking a step back could be time off work for a short period of time can just enable you to focus on the other things that I've outlined, and just reflecting on where are you at, where do you want to go. And I think one thing that I really want to emphasize on to anyone that may be watching is that you do have the power to change your life. You do, or to change a circumstance.
mm,
And I say that with care because I appreciate some people may be in difficult situations. But I think for me, what helped me really just overcome that moment was recognizing I can control certain things. There may be some things I can't control, but I can control certain things. And through me taking back that power, I was able to just gradually come back and just as you already know, like do amazing things
mm.
towards the end of 2024. Whereas some people are in situations where they just feel like they just can't leave a job
Yeah.
or they can't move. And it's sad because life is short and you never want to be in a situation where you're in an environment that, in a space where you feel trapped. That's not the life that I want to live. And
Mm,
that's, I'm really wanting to show you all that
mm,
if that's not the life you want to live, you can take steps though difficult to get out of that.
Thank you for sharing. And I mean, I'm curious because I think a lot of people have gone through a lot of things in the background. And one thing I love about the generation coming up is that they really are dissolving shame culture. Like everything that I think when we grew up, everyone would say, oh, we don't speak about that. They are here telling us everything. You know, when people get laid off, people are filming videos as it happens because they know they're going to need community support. So I love the fact that people are a bit more mindful, but in them being mindful, they're actually destigmatizing a lot of these things that people used to feel so much shame about.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's actually no shame felt if you're in community. Because even when I think about myself, when I decided to transition publicly, a lot of people were like, oh yeah, that's a very bad idea because what if it doesn't work out? But I had community, and in being able to actually have those people carry me throughout that journey and speaking to them because, you know, I was very public about it. Like one day, hey guys, I'm transitioning from this to this. I hope you continue to support me because bearing in mind that everybody knew me as like the finance lawyer and I would post here and there, but obviously I didn't need to curate a public profile, personal brand, whatever you like to call it, or thought leadership at the time. But I realized for me, I think the big difference in what's been cathartic in so many ways is having brought that community with me as opposed to thinking, okay, I'm going to go and do this on my own in closed doors. And what's been amazing for me and pleasantly surprising is that all the people that were with me back then are still with me now. And I find that crazy because you wouldn't necessarily think. I did lose a lot of friends, family, because not a lot of people supported the decision. And I think that's what leads other people to sort of maybe hold on tightly to certain identities and titles and paychecks. And, you know, I think people may not necessarily think you are okay when you're like, I'm giving up the six figures to pursue social entrepreneurship. They're like, are you sure? But it's about, you have to have, I think, strong boundaries, but also be very strong on the inside about what exactly you want your outer reality to look like.
Yeah.
But I do want to ask you, what about people who don't necessarily have access to therapy? Because as you know, with Seize the Light, we're trying to democratize access to holistic well-being because we've recognized that not everybody has access to therapists, holistic practitioners, coaches, even fitness facilities or whatever it is that's going to elevate their mental health. It is still a sector, or I would say like a space which is, we're still being sold wellness, and that's making solving the mental health issue a little bit complex because you do need resources as a provider and as somebody having to receive those resources. So what would be your advice to someone who may not necessarily be able to access therapy or have resources or have community, but find themselves in a similar situation?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. I would say the first thing is seeing whether there are any free access to um, therapy where you are. So I'm based in the UK, and though there may be a waiting list, but there is free access to things like cognitive behavioral therapy, because there is that recognition of what you said, people who may not have the funds to be able to go private. So that's the first thing, like doing your research. I even know like therapy platforms that offer financial support or a discounted rate because of people who may be on a low income, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So it's again doing your research about that. For me, also, one thing that I'm very intentional with is planting myself in communities. So, for example, when I went to uni as a woman of faith, one of the things that I did from the outset was find a church home. And what that enabled me to do is almost connect with like-minded people, and those people almost became my tribe at university. Even now, like I've got a church I go to, and these aren't there's no cost necessarily attached to that. I know churches obviously do offering and all of that stuff, but that's optional. It's not something that you're obliged to do. So it's that, and I know for me with the churches that I have been part of, they always try and go above and beyond just the Sunday service. They'll have opportunities to like really just socialize, interact with others, and sometimes that in itself is therapy.
Mm.
Being around people and just not isolating yourself. Because for me, there's a saying that a family member kind of said to me last year, and it really stuck with me. And this was a time when I was going through my difficult situation. Like, isolation leads to annihilation.
Oh,
Almost, that's where your thoughts could really overtake you. So it's so important, even if you're just going out, you may not be divulging or disclosing everything to the people you're around, but
mm,
surrounding yourself with people. Another thing, it could be just going on a walk.
mm,
Like, a walk is free. It could be a 5 minute walk, a 10 minute walk, because I've had times where I'm just, my weight, like my thoughts almost get so heavy that you just need a walk. You need a release. And going for a walk for 5, 10 minutes can do that. It can help you process your thoughts well, or just focus on other things, focus on your surroundings. So it's things like that. I think we're now at a point where, especially if we're looking at, I appreciate, the people who are watching maybe based all around the globe, but we're now at a point where, like, there are support and services out there for those who may be from who may not be able to access these resources otherwise. And yeah, that's some advice that I would give on that.
oh, your point around isolation is quite powerful. And, one thing I hadn't necessarily appreciated is that some of these jobs, by their very nature, perpetuate your isolation. Because, if you think about a traditional, I hate to use the example of law. It's not, and I don't want people to think I'm coming for the law. I'm just making it as an example. When you're in that traditional route, you go to school, you're very hyper individualistic and focused on your performance, your marks, like your employment opportunity. And then when you get to the workplace, because everyone has competed to get those limited seats, people aren't necessarily collaborative or wanting to form these communities that we know are so important. So for some people, it can be challenging because if you haven't necessarily curated your own community outside of the workplace or in family, and then you come into work and you spend so much of your time there. And I think this is why so many of these conversations are now being had in the workplace, whereas historically you would leave all of this at home, but that's because there was more balance with how much time you spent at home. But now, because people are basically spending so much of their day at work, this is why we need to carry in these conversations into the workplace and why they've become relevant. And, thinking about just like the average day of you going into the office and sitting at your cubicle, you can actually still be very lonely because you might not speak to anybody. You might be in a hostile working environment. You might be in a toxic working environment. It can be so lonely and isolating. And if you have people around you that maybe don't even understand the nature of your job, you may not necessarily get that comfort or that understanding that you're looking for regarding how challenging your situation might be. And I think that that's what's led to the suicide rate increasing, because I think people necessarily haven't found the right people to speak to. And as I explained, if you've gone through that traditional route, chances are you were that friend who had to cancel plans. So maybe you're no longer in the friendship group because people know, like, we can't count on Miriam, she's not going to come. And that's now led to them maybe not inviting you as much. So when you find yourself in the dark place, it's unfortunate because there's nobody there, and I never used to understand the statement of it's lonely at the top. but I think it's so relevant for now. But I think you have to be resolute in you wanting to bring a community with you so that it's not lonely for you there. Because if we're all going, then it's not going to be lonely. But I'm not, and again, I'm not coming from for the previous generations, but I do think that they were more hyper individualistic and wanting to get to the top, whereas I think we're more, I'm seeing the top. It looks good, but I need to like bring my community with me so we can all enjoy it. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that something that I hadn't appreciated is that some of these jobs, by the very nature of the job, it isolates you. So people's isolation is not intentional. It's not them actively putting themselves. It's just inadvertently happened. And when you're not mindful and conscious, and obviously I study well-being in structures, so I understand now how these mental health issues arise, people's circumstances, how they're not choosing these circumstances, but how they find themselves in the circumstances. This is what's leading me to understand why these workplace mental well-being issues have actually arisen, and we can't necessarily be applying the same approaches to solving them, because how do you solve if your employee came to you and said, I feel lonely?
Yeah.
There's really not much as an employer you can really say. And I mean, a lot of what I'm saying leads me to my next point that I would like us to speak about, but around this cultural intelligence. And I think for me, it sounds like it's emotional intelligence, right? Because it's what you were saying, I think, at the beginning of the podcast, where a manager would have to be self-aware, really get to understand Miriam. But where exactly do we think people learn cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence? Because I think you did mention that there's these psychoanalytical tests, which I think give you a snapshot as to somebody's personality, but I don't think or do a good job of maybe defining the full spectrum of you as a person. How do you think that we go about navigating cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence, because these are not necessarily found within formal academic structures?
Yeah, yeah. I think some workplaces do this really well, and they essentially offer the benefit of therapy. And what that essentially does is removes that stigma attached to therapy.
Mm,
And similar to like a job offering, like a corporate gym membership, that is something that they could take on and do
mm,
externally.
mm,
But in doing that, of course, that employee may have, it's optional. It's not, they're not obliged to do it, or they may not be in a position where they want that, and that's fair enough. But you're almost allowing employees to recognize that it's not, the onus is not just solely on the employer, right? You
mm,
have to be proactive in going to find the relevant support and then utilizing that. And what that does is enables people to do the inner work. And as someone that has gone through extensive therapy,
mm,
I now could look at people, look at whether it's people within organizations, even up until leadership,
mm,
and just realize just by the way they move,
yeah,
act, talk, that they haven't done the inner work that enables them to be that bit more emotionally intelligent.
mm,
Like, I'm a completely different person before therapy compared to after therapy, in the sense that I resonate with people differently. I understand people differently. I'm mindful of how I speak about certain things because of that. And I think sometimes when you're in corporate environments, because of, I'm not saying it's with all, but going into leadership, for example, where you're managing those beneath you, doesn't, there's no prerequisite to do therapy.
yeah,
And as a result, you're getting leaders sometimes in certain environments where they aren't emotionally intelligent. They may be a good leader, or when you look at their CV, they're
mm,
hitting a lot of those boxes, but are they emotionally intelligent enough to manage an employee who may be going through a difficult time? And I went to Ghana a few months back, and On my way back, I was in the airport
mm,
and waiting for my baggage to arrive. And I came across this man who was on the phone. I could tell he was a lawyer from how he was speaking. And this was probably, I think this was on a weekend. It was definitely not a weekday. And it was pretty late. It was probably around, I would say, late evening time. And he was speaking to an employee. And essentially, what he was saying is, yeah, you've taken an extensive period of time off work because of emotional issues. You need to figure out when you're going to come back in, because it was just so, it was almost like he was detached,
mm,
so detached.
mm,
And for me, that hit me because it was like, this man is clearly in a leadership role. He clearly has that power and he's almost misusing that power. Because forget about your title for a moment. If you're speaking to an employee or someone under you who's clearly going through a difficult time and you're almost giving them the ultimatum
yeah,
to come back in,
yeah,
what does that show you? It shows you there's leaders who haven't done the work or who don't understand that people are more than just a job title. And I think the more people start to embrace things like therapy, the more there could be that environment where you've got a corporate environment and then you've got emotionally intelligent leaders. And I do think that maybe, and this could be controversial,
mm,
maybe there needs to be more of a check or due diligence check prior to even promoting someone into leadership or someone being recruited to go into leadership in terms of that emotional intelligence piece, whether it's psychometrics tests or whether it's like, I know competency based interviews are completely different, but an interview style where you could question them when it comes to recruitment to understand, okay, give me an example when you've dealt with a person that or an employee that may have been going through difficult times, and how did you navigate that difficult times emotionally, and how did you navigate that? Like, let's now move to that rather than questions that may not show whether they are emotionally intelligent or not. So yeah, I mean it's a big thing, and I may not have all the answers, but
mm.
from what I've seen, that could potentially support or move the needle, even if it's by 0.1%. Yeah.
I think that that's very interesting. And I mean, in the psychological safety space in the workplace, it's been shown that a lot of people don't feel psychologically safe. And I think even if we do move to more formal metrics of measuring emotional intelligence, people get good at rigging the system, unfortunately. And you can only really measure somebody's character in real time, I think. And
True.
I like you am very observant of people. And I think it's in the small things. It's in like going to the grocery store and seeing, does somebody help somebody struggling? If somebody drops something, do they pick it up? It's small things like that. But the question that I ask myself, especially being here in the UK, because culturally it's a little different to South Africa. You're in a community where people don't even ask, how are you? Because you guys say you are right and then you walk off. By the time I'm saying yes, you down the street, you're in your car, you're home. So you don't even stop to hear the response. So I ask myself the question all the time, then how do we actually solve the issue? If you're not even invested into asking the person the question and staying for the answer, then us saying, okay, everybody needs to go to mandatory therapy. And mind you, I was speaking to somebody yesterday who was actually saying to me, some people will go to therapy, but it doesn't show. And I think that there's so much truth in that, because you can go through the process, but I think there's a lot more worked around the intentionality of why you're going there. If my fear is, if these things become mandatory in the workplace, people would do it as a mere tick box exercise and then miss the point. because we want to intellectualize everything. And with emotional intelligence, I don't think it's something that we can intellectualize because we haven't necessarily understood the emotional body in the same, and the emotional and the mental body, I would say, in the same way that the physical body is being studied. People are denying that even emotions exist. They think emotions are things that only women experience. So
Yeah.
it's such a nuanced area that I fear in making these things mandatory, it will become a tick box exercise. And then you will have people who bypass the actual internal work that then actually takes away from the quality of doing real internal work and the quality of the output and the person that you're supposed to become. But I agree with you. I mean, I don't necessarily have any solutions. I mean, I do my role of helping people become emotionally intelligent through emotional regulation, because obviously through more self-awareness practices like breath work, meditation, and yoga, you're able to connect with yourself. So if Miriam has, submitted work that's completely wrong, it's not me becoming so agitated that, oh, how she got it wrong again. It's breathing, understanding, okay, Miriam is a first year. Maybe I didn't explain it properly. Maybe I should do it again. But it's so hard to be in that mindset when profit is on the line, because unfortunately that's the main driver for a lot of these organizations. It is who can do the work in the most profitable way. So it's almost as if maybe there isn't necessarily the space to be emotionally intelligent, because yes, we can talk about it theoretically. It sounds practical and doable, but the implementation of it becomes very difficult when profit is on the line, and especially in time sensitive environments.
Yeah.
People might not necessarily have the time to nurse your feelings or be emotionally intelligent, as you're mentioning this person at the airport. He's probably just thinking he's one person down in his team due to an emotional issue, which in his mind, he's probably thinking it's not that deep, like just come to work. Because also some people only can feel things deeply if they've experienced them. So she
True.
might be experiencing an emotional issue that he doesn't necessarily resonate with. So there is that disconnect. If it's a breakup, for example, he might think, oh, whatever, you'll find somebody else. But to her, it's like the love of her life. So it becomes so complex navigating all of this. And I think it goes back to what you said about the workplace is actually a human to human experience. And that's that on that finish.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I agree with you on that, but I'm not sure how we necessarily move to encouraging people to do the work from a genuine perspective, because I can see how, of course, if we have the KPIs there that you need to meet these KPIs for your soft skills, people will do it. But as to whether there's the intention and the genuineness behind it is another question. So I don't know if you have any further thoughts on what I've just said.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one thing that we've clearly highlighted is that it's a thing within society that needs to change somewhat, but the question is how.
Mm,
And that's what I'm very keen on seeing, because I have seen the impact of being in a toxic environment, and some people actually experience
mm,
like work trauma because of some of the things that they go through because of the leaders. So there's real damage. But then, as you said, like if it becomes a prerequisite of doing like a psychometric test or some form of test that could help, that could essentially say, well, you have to do therapy before moving into this position, then it's like it can be a tick box, and you never want to become. I never want to be in a society where they become desensitized to therapy, because I know the weight of it and how it can really literally change your life. So it's an interesting one, but something does need to change, particularly when it comes to the corporate world. And yeah,
And I
yeah,
mean, I would just add Dr. Spirit, actually, she's a famous doctor in America, and she was saying that most mental illnesses develop by the age of 14.
right,
Yet people only walk into like a therapist's office about a decade after that. And that's at best, that they start seeing people. And that would be people who are on the mental illness spectrum. So obviously there's health and then there's the illness side of things. So sometimes it's a lot of people are sitting undiagnosed with maybe just something that's mental health that can easily be uh, not necessarily diagnosed but worked on, and then it won't go all the way to the full spectrum of mental illness. But because obviously we've had all the stigma around what mental health is, we haven't necessarily appreciated the dichotomy between mental health and mental illness. And what you do to solve mental health and mental illness is very different, because mental illness, that's your schizophrenia, your dementia, those kind of mental issues which require, you to get admitted. But then there's mental health, and the medical industry only really solves the diagnosis part of mental health, right? Because they will diagnose you're depressed, but it doesn't necessarily take account of what happens before diagnosis, which is preventative care. So this is where, organizations like Seize the Light exist and come into play, because we deal with that preventative. What can you do in order to circumvent getting depressed? Because a lot of people only focus on, I'm well for as long as I'm not diagnosed. But that's a very dangerous line to be straddling, because you might not never ever get diagnosed until you reach mental illness. So a lot of the shift that we need to have when it comes to destigmatizing mental health is sort of understanding the intervention pre-diagnosis, because not everybody's going to get the diagnosis.
Yeah, yeah,
And in us understanding and changing our mindset around these self-care practices, it's sort of you bulletproofing your mind and making sure that when those bullets, fire, you're not going to actually get shot and die. And I know that's a very dramatic example to make, and I don't know why I'm even using that one as the first one that came to mind, but it's sort of just making sure that you're putting in those guardrails for yourself. But I think a lot of people underestimate that it's not necessarily about reaching therapy and diagnosis. It's also about educating what can you do to not even get into the therapist's office, because there are so many things that you can do to become self-aware and get to know you, that you might not necessarily even need to walk into a therapist's office, because arguably then you're already at the diagnosis stage, which is far gone to where you actually need to be. So I don't know what's your view on
yeah. That's so good. That's
that.
so good. No, it's so good because even for me, when I was when I was going through depression, I also started to look at things like diet. And as someone who comes from, well, born and raised in the UK, but my background's Ghanaian. Our diet is very carb rich, it's not always your healthiest plate.
Yeah,
Delicious, delicious cuisine, but
yeah,
not always your healthiest plate.
yeah.
So I start to look at that, like how can diet impact your mental health, and understanding the gut, the microbiome, like the science behind it. And oftentimes it could just be a tweak in
Mhm.
your diet that could shift everything.
Mm.
So, to your point, it's how can we look at the preventative measures rather than almost looking at, okay, when it happens, what do we do? And I think we still, as a society, particularly in the UK, have an issue with when it happens, what do we do?
Yeah,
Sometimes the resolution is medication,
yeah.
but is that always the option? Or should that always be the option? Could it be giving them a gym membership,
Mm.
educating them on a course of eating well and how that could impact your mental health? Because I've definitely lived a large portion of my life almost detaching food from everything else, food from mood. But when I look at moments of my life where I felt low,
Mm.
the diet did not make sense. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
I may have gone to a Ben and Jerry's, but
yeah, yeah.
it's not a coincidence. So it's that, and I love the
Yeah.
fact that Caesar is doing that. Like not necessarily looking at the diet and excess, well, the diet side of things, but you're looking at, okay, what tools, what resources, how can we educate society to focus on the preventative measures, and I mean that. line that you said essentially of people get diagnosed a lot later or may
Mm.
well not be diagnosed is scary. So what could you do
Yeah.
in that time? And I think we've had a lot of education about lifestyle, how you're living, but I don't think people really understand the impact. And there's this documentary that is currently on Channel 4 in the UK that's speaking to the the link between your gut, your health, your food, and external things, or internal things. External things being, for example, if you're suffering from acne,
Yeah.
could your diet or a change of your diet address that issue? And essentially, what they found is that it can,
Yeah.
or it can minimize the just minimize it or just make it that bit more calmer. But yeah, that was mind blowing to me because I have never thought of a skin condition being linked to something that I put in my mouth. So that
Yeah.
education
Yeah.
of the impact
Yeah.
of natural things that people can access on a regular basis because we're always eating, right?
Yeah.
We could always go on a walk, irrespective of what your lifestyle was saying you can. It could be walking in your house.
Mm.
What could that do to your life, to your lifespan, to how happy you are? Understanding endorphins, how that works. I now go to the gym on a regular basis, and I've moved from trying to get a six pack. Like that is just a bonus.
Yeah.
I now understand no, the mental
Yeah.
impact
Yeah.
is far more greater than the physical. So yeah, I just echo what you said.
I love that, and I do want to do a shameless plug now that we are going to be focusing more on nutrition this year, hopefully, because there's actually the Ayurvedic eating system where you can heal the gut using spices, but it's quite complex, and I'm trying to get better on my content journey. So as I improve, and I'll be able to educate a bit more around all of these things, but absolutely gut health is it's so underrated and it's something that we've overlooked. I myself have gone through
Yeah,
my whole acne journey. I've taken topical creams, like medication, all of these things. But I think for me, once I started really leaning into the more holistic side of things and healing my gut through spices, this is what's actually healed my skin.
wow.
I'll share a picture with you offline of what my skin used to look like because I know you made your comments on it the other day, but you'll be very surprised. So I do believe in these things, um, not just because of what the woo-woo science says, but it's my own empirical evidence as well that I'm like, I definitely believe it all. Miriam, I could carry on speaking to you for so much longer, but I'm mindful of our time and I never like the audience to watch for longer than a certain amount of time. But as we wrap up, I'm curious to know what exactly is it that you think actually led to you being public about your experience and how you conquered your depression. Because there's a lot of people that go through things that don't necessarily think, you know what, I'm going to publicize this because I don't want somebody else to go through this. Or if somebody finds himself in a dark place, let them seize the light and see me having conquered and gone from here to here. Some people they overcome quietly or some people suffer silently. So what do you think is the catalyst or was the catalyst for you to go, okay, I need to share this?
So to be completely honest, I was very hesitant, very very hesitant. But as I was speaking more about it, I realized very quickly that I was almost helping those around me who look like me in particular just understand that this is something that could happen to anyone and almost normalizing the conversation and removing that stigma. And for me, I may not be as vocal about everything in my life on a public domain, but in private, I am very open, and I want to be. So for me, as I was speaking to people, they really just understood like how this girl had just transformed her life so quickly through doing the inner work.
mm,
And a lot of people within my network, so some of whom are like I would see as like mentors, would just put the thought out there like, why don't you speak about that more? And I thought, "Oh, like, like I am speaking about it to
yeah,
you or to the people around me, but I'm
yeah,
like that's a whole different level.
yeah,
But they planted that seed. And if you remember what I said earlier on, was that when I overcame depression, I was really led to just inspire and uplift. And oftentimes, you can't really do that if you don't share your story.
mm,
And I saw the impact that it was having just by me sharing my story to those around me. So I thought, okay, there's clearly something here.
mm,
And I'm very much a huge advocate of therapy. And sometimes you need to just not just speak about that within your intimate group, like just do your bit.
mm,
And because I prior to that was really just posting with intention, I thought, okay, maybe there's something here where I could post about it, control what I divulge,
mm,
but just highlight that there's something in doing the work and in therapy and in
mm,
depression.
mm,
And it just literally resonated with so many people. So many people. People reached out to me offline. Like it was just overwhelming, you know. And for me, I didn't care about the traction it got. Like it was probably
yeah,
one of my highest engaged posts that I got, but it was more like the impact. And that one situation where I overcame that fear has now enabled me to unlock a door. And that door is almost feel the fear and
mm,
do it anyway, because you never know who you can impact. And I truly believe, especially with how I live life, that life is really for making an impact
mm,
and helping others, however you do it, whether it's you being a nurse, a midwife, a lawyer, a charity worker. Like
mm,
it's all about making an impact. And by me doing that, it was just a reminder that, yeah, if I can help one person, then I've done my bit. So yeah, I hope that gives you a bit of an insight as to what led me or was a catalyst to
yeah.
actually doing that.
I really love that, and I know that not everybody is called to vulnerability and storytelling and healing, and that's also okay, you know. And I do encourage more people to share because I do think it is encouraging to see somebody who has been able to alchemize and turn things around, and also just appreciate that everybody has gone through something, because I
Yeah,
think there's also you exactly what you said. Some people think you haven't ever gone through anything because of how you look, or you're not going through anything because of how you look. But it's about us being more compassionate towards each other. And as I like to always say, like, you have to just be kind because you never know what people are going through. And that self-control and that self-awareness is so important, because it can be your words of what you say to somebody. If you find them in a dark place, you don't know what they may do. So
yeah,
it's being mindful of what are you saying to people. But I would never say something to somebody that I would never say to myself. And that's just like my principles and how I try to lead with compassion and kind words at all times. Miriam, I don't know if you do want to close out with what people can expect further from you. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention that the BBC thing, because you did post about it publicly.
hmm.
So I don't know if you want to leave with what we can expect from you, if you want people to follow you, what your call to action may be. I'll just give you a moment for you to plug yourself.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I love what you're doing. And I just can't wait to see just how you continue to just thrive and make an impact in the area that you're moving in. And I'm looking forward to the spices too, the spice healing. But what people can expect is just me continuing to move with intention in, let's say, the spaces I'm in. So there's a lot of collaboration opportunities that are coming out. Um, Me working with organizations I would have dreamed of a few years ago. So that, and just me continuing to be someone that really wants to do their bit to make an impact.
Mm.
So I know you mentioned the BBC. I'll say, if you want to find out a bit more about that, follow me.
Oh, they have to follow you.
Follow me. Follow me. Yeah, follow me.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it's not me really trying to tease it, just kind of just saying just I don't want to
Follow
disclose too
along.
much on here,
Yeah.
just
Can we
follow,
expect to see you in law?
watch this space. Watch
You're
this
like, maybe, maybe not.
watch this space, watch this space. But right now I am just excited for where I'm going. And law, I mean, I study law. I still use it on a day to day, even in sales, because you've got a lot of the companies that you work for, particularly in the fintech world, you've got GDPR
Mm,
regulations and
mm,
data protection, all of that stuff.
of
So,
course.
and you've got to sell with integrity. You've also got to be compliant when you sell. So I do use it.
Mm,
But in terms of me moving into law,
mm.
I would say, yeah, just it's not something that it's on the agenda anytime soon. But yeah, watch this space. I'm still young in my career,
Yeah.
so watch this space. But follow me if you like. If you like, it's not by force.
It's by force. If you watch this, you better give her a follow. And also, please follow the podcast. Please like the episode. We're everywhere. Wherever you're watching, Spotify, YouTube, or any other streaming platform, Apple Podcasts as well. Please follow. And also follow Miriam on LinkedIn. I almost did Instagram on LinkedIn, and myself on LinkedIn. Miriam, departing words, mantra you want to leave, an affirmation that you'd like to leave for anybody who's resonated with your story. What is it that you want, the last imparting words that you would like to leave with them?
Life is short. I mean, we've all heard that saying before, but take time to look at where you're at now and ask yourself one question, just one question. And it could be a positive answer, it could be a negative answer, but are you happy with where you're at? And if you are, then amazing. But if you're not, please understand that you do have the power to change that.
I love that. I almost felt like you were asking me and coming for me. I felt you genuinely asking the question. But thank you for leaving that with the audience. Yeah, it's a great journal prompt for anybody. Maybe that's what you ask yourself over the next few days in your quiet moments of introspection, and just write down, are you happy? Are you not? And you introspect and continue to analyze your internal emotional body from then on. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Lancet Podcast. Miriam, thank you for joining us on the first episode for 2025, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Take care.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Bye.